All right, I love starting with a loaded question. Why in the heck do you want this job?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm really honored to represent the 1st District in the U.S. Congress, and I've been in my position for a little more than 2 years, and I feel like I just got started. And I spent time in the Oregon legislature working on policy, and that's a collaborative body, and I've taken that attitude with me to the Congress. It's a great district I represent. It's very diverse. Urban, suburban, rural, coastal, forestry, agriculture, and of course Washington County, where we are right now, with all the high tech and businesses. So it's a really great district, and I'm really honored to represent it.
But there are aspects of the job that are tedious, they're stressful, they're teeth clenching, those kinds of things. And you could have done lots of things. You could have comfortably stayed here in Oregon. Yet
Sure.
you decided to make the leap, and so there had to be a certain kind of commitment in you that said, boy, I want to do this for whatever reason.
I wanted to do, thank you for the question, I wanted to do it because the skills that I gained through my life experiences, working my way through college, raising children, doing volunteer work in the community, working at the Federal Trade Commission, all of those skills came together. And from working in the Oregon legislature, where I was able to really accomplish quite a lot of good work, I felt that this was the time when we needed somebody with my background and my commitment to represent this great district in the Congress.
And as you mentioned, you're kind of the new kid on the block as far as Congress is concerned. When you walked into that buzzsaw, what was your first impression, and how has that evolved over, say, just a couple of years you've been there?
Sure. Well, the first time I walked onto the floor, I really felt what an awesome responsibility it is, and it really is an honor. And every time I walk on the floor to take a vote, I still have that feeling, and I don't think that's going to go away. That I'm one of 435 who represent constituents in this great country, making decisions that affect not only them but the whole nation. So it's really an honor. I take it very seriously. And I work hard to listen to my constituents, to understand what their concerns and needs are here in Oregon, and represent them in Washington, D.C. And even though I'm somewhat the new kid on the block, I've been there more than 2 years, I built a lot of relationships on both sides of the aisle, and have good friends on both sides of the aisle, and I'm really focused on finding common ground and getting things done where we can.
And that's such a key point, because in so many cases, that is a land of not only compromise but brick walls, and you don't get everything you want back there. Do you feel that despite your best efforts that you are still running into challenges that don't seem to make sense, or that are a source of frustration?
Well, there are some. Well, I don't look at it as frustration, although I have to say, if you would have asked me that last October during the shutdown, yes, I was frustrated, but so were almost all of my colleagues. Everybody I talked to was frustrated during the shutdown. So that being said, once the shutdown ended in October, there have been a lot of positive signs since then of working together. We passed a bipartisan budget. We passed an appropriations bill. We've really been able to do a lot. Are there things left undone that we should be working on? Absolutely. And we'll continue to work on those and hopefully find common ground and start getting some more things done.
Aside from the shutdown, which was its own source of frustration for the nation, the Congress still does not exactly have glowing reviews from the country at large. You have the luxury of seeing progress that's made from within inside, but as a whole, Capitol Hill is not getting a lot of rave reviews. Is that unfair, or is frequent gridlock and the frustration the rest of the nation feels somewhat or exceedingly deserved?
Well, I have to say both. Some of it's unfair because, of course, the media likes to focus on controversy, and they don't necessarily do a story. Well, the members of Congress are getting along today. They like conflict, and so they tend to focus on conflict. And so when there's conflict and controversy, that always makes the headlines. But that being said, there are a lot of people who still have some work to do in terms of getting things done. And I have to say that there are some issues that, like emergency unemployment, for example, I'd like to see the Speaker bring up for a vote. Immigration reform, I'd like to see the Speaker bring up for a vote.
What influence at this point do you have? Do you feel that you have to bring some of these issues up?
Well, I continue to express my voice. I participated in a press conference on the steps of the Capitol last week with people from across the country who have lost their emergency unemployment insurance, continuing to look for work, but they don't have that lifeline now. And I had a similar meeting here in Oregon after the emergency unemployment ended. I had several Oregonians around the table to tell their stories. So I express my views, and we try to make the point that these people need the assistance. They are looking for work. This helps them pay their rent, feed their family, put gas in the car, and have a phone so they can continue to look for work. So we keep repeating the message, and hopefully we'll be able to vote on that soon.
I know you've got several pet projects, and I want you to be able to talk about them, and I don't want to belabor the negative part of it, but I know that a lot of what Congress is right now is a sore spot for a lot of the folks who will, among other things, be seeing this video
Sure.
or reading this newspaper, the older Americans, especially the 55 plus.
Right.
And for them who have just gotten so disgusted with the government, they don't even want to participate anymore, or they don't have any faith in government anymore, what do you say to them?
I say, please do not give up. This is a system of government we have, and we can speak up or we can give up, and the best thing to do is to speak up, because if we give up, that doesn't change the system. It is the system that we have, and I am committed to working as hard as I can to restore integrity, and that's why I've been pushing back on some of the partisan antics that I've seen in Congress that I didn't see in the state legislature. Things like partisan floor speeches. I don't do that. Things like in the Oregon legislature, when people enter, the representatives and senators enter into the committee room, they sit together in staggered seating. In Congress, the Democrats sit on one side, the Republicans sit on the other. I continue to speak out about those practices and to not participate in the partisan bickering, and to, again, find common ground with my colleagues and try to work together. It's the system of government that we have. We are making decisions on behalf of the country, so please don't give up on that. If people who are watching or listening want to contact my office, we have great staff in here who help with things like constituent cases, Social Security, Medicare, immigration, IRS, any federal agency or entity. We can help constituents with those. So even though there are some people who are frustrated with the partisan bickering in Congress, I encourage them to stay involved in the process, and I'm working, doing my part to make things better there.
Well, that's a nice transition to my next question, and that is, you have an opportunity one-on-one, especially the senior population I'm talking about now, to meet with them on your trips home and back there, and
Right.
also people who call you. And what are the issues? What are the hot spots, especially among the senior population, when they contact you and say, help?
Sure. Well, for calls that we get into the Office for Constituent Help, it's often things like Medicare, Social Security, and immigration, those and veterans issues as well. Those are some of the top issues that we hear about from our constituents. But constituents call and write about many different issues, but in terms of being able to offer case help and work on their particular cases, those are really the top issues: Social Security, Medicare, veterans, and immigration.
And what have you been able to do to help in those?
Oh, we have people who can really work on cases, and sometimes it just takes a call or some extra effort on our behalf. We can't promise positive results in every case, but we have been able to help a lot of people. Well, just one that comes to mind that is actually not in those categories, but somebody called because they were concerned about bank overcharge. And we made a call, and then the next thing I know, I was talking to the couple, and they said, we restored their faith in government because the bank reversed the charge. And that's just one little example of helping someone where we were able to make a difference in their perception of what government can do and how we can be helpful. But there are lots of cases. I hesitate to talk in too much detail, but especially the immigration cases are, we're trying to keep families together oftentimes.
In this land of advertising and image and everything else,
Right.
You have areas of special interest. What is your brand? How do you want to be known?
Well, I like to be known as someone who's a hard worker, who's collaborative, and who has integrity. And on some of the issues, I like to be known as someone who is responsive to the needs of the district I represent. A couple of bills that I had passed already in the House have to do with cleaning up tsunami debris that's washing up on the coast. Over in my district is the North Coast, Clatsop County, but in all coastal areas. So I was able to listen to concerns, introduce legislation, and get that through the House. But I'm also very concerned about issues like education, pre-K through higher education, because it's important to the health of our communities to make sure that we have an educated population and people who are going to go create those jobs and work in our businesses. And then finally, the Older Americans Act. I hear from a lot of seniors about the importance of programs that are funded by the Older Americans Act, things like Meals on Wheels. We went out recently and delivered meals in Washington County with one of the dedicated Meals on Wheels volunteers. And oftentimes, as you know, the person delivering the meal, that may be their only social contact that day, is having that person come, check in, deliver the food. So it's nutrition and it's the social contact. So I've introduced a reauthorization of the Older Americans Act, updating some of its provisions. It expired in 2011. It's time to update that, and I'm looking forward to working on that. That bill actually goes through the Education and Workforce Committee, on which I serve.
Okay, excellent. I'm sure you touched on some of this already, but just if you don't mind me framing this, let's talk about your 3 top pet projects as we look toward the immediate and long-range future.
Sure.
What's number 1?
Education, improving education.
Big job. How in the world do you do
Absolutely. The federal role is in federal education policy, and there's a couple of things. Reforming No Child Left Behind, or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. My goal is to change that so that there's less focus on high stakes testing. We need good assessments of our students, but we need assessments that help inform teachers how to improve instruction. That will lead to more well-rounded education, and I think that that's going to help with creativity and innovation and reducing dropout rates and closing gender gaps in some of the areas like math and science. So making big changes to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or No Child Left Behind. Also reforming the Higher Education Act to make college more affordable. I worked my way through community college, and law school with a combination of grants and loans and work study. But when I hear from families today, the costs are insurmountable, and a lot of students are discouraged from attending college because the costs are so high. So reducing the cost, making access more affordable for everyone, that's an opportunity that everyone should have to get higher education.
As wonderful as that sounds, it almost sounds pie in the sky. How are you going to reduce the cost of education?
Well, there's lots of ways we can do that. The Pell Grant program has been wonderful in making sure that low-income students are served. I have a bill to help Pell Grant eligible students get internships so that they can add that to their resume and have better luck at their career choices post-graduation. One of the bills that I've introduced is a Pay It Forward pilot project, and that's something that Oregon is working on as well. To study the possibility, the feasibility of having tuition upfront, paid upfront, and then repaid. It's not free tuition, but it's paid upfront and then repaid based on a percentage of income for a set number of years. This is being done in the private sector quite successfully, looking at different models to make sure that that happens, and then also advocating for investment in education at a federal level. Early education, that really pays off in the long term when kids are ready to learn. So education is one of my priorities, rebuilding the economy. It's all related because education is important to rebuilding the economy. And doing that through making sure that we're investing in infrastructure, so we have the roads, the bridges that we need to get people to work and goods to market. There are lots of efforts now underway to reform our tax structure. We need to make sure that we're closing loopholes and have a fair tax structure that provides the revenue that we need, but also is fair for families and businesses. And then also, I'm a supporter of small businesses. My first job was in my mom's store, a small business, making sure that small businesses get the startup capital they need, the guidance that they need through organizations like the Small Business Administration, or in the private sector, making sure that there's access to capital. So all of those things contribute to a healthy economy, as well as access to health care.
Do you think that there's room for enough common ground in Congress to see the kinds of changes you're looking at on the issue of the economy?
I hope so. Certainly in terms of infrastructure, that investment in infrastructure has traditionally been bipartisan. There are a lot of conversations now because our Highway Trust Fund is running low, and we need to work on finding ways to make sure that we're funding transportation. As a nation, compared with other developed nations, we don't invest enough in infrastructure compared to other nations, and it's a win-win. There are jobs during the construction phase, but it also helps with, as I said, getting people to work and goods to market, making sure that we have multimodal transportation. So my third priority, again related, is making sure that we have a strong social safety net for those who need that. And that includes the Older Americans Act, which helps seniors age with dignity, stay in their home, provide services like Meals on Wheels, also has the CSEP, which is the Senior Employment Community Program that helps older Americans get back into the workforce. I found that a lot of the long-term unemployed are more mature, and oftentimes they need some training, new training for new positions. CSEP provides that job training. I'm also adding my name as a co-sponsor to a piece of legislation that is going to strengthen provisions against age discrimination, which I'm very concerned about. So I'm looking forward to working on that when I get back to Washington, D.C. as well.
Excellent. What's been your biggest disappointment and your biggest thrill in the past couple of years?
I would just say my biggest disappointment was the government shutdown. I worked for the federal government in the mid-1980s when there was a shutdown, and it lasted about a day, maybe a day and a half. So, and I knew as a federal employee at the time how detrimental it was. So I didn't expect that it would happen. And then when it happened, it went on for about 17 days until the government reopened. That was a big disappointment to me. I think my biggest thrill had to be the day I was sworn into the House the first time. Because I came in a special election, I had my own swearing in, and it was the first time I stood and spoke on the House floor, and it was really, truly a tremendous opportunity to express words of appreciation for the opportunity, and my family was there and met a lot of great colleagues that day. And as I said earlier, every time I walk onto the floor, I really sense the awesome responsibility it is.
At a personal level, this cross-country job you've got now, how does that change your life?
I spend more time on planes, but that's not a challenge to me. I have my routine down, and I get on the plane, and I usually read or work. When I'm heading back to Washington, D.C., I'm preparing typically for hearings, and then when I'm coming back from D.C. to Oregon, I'm often working on, longer-term projects and doing some more in-depth reading, and every once in a while I read a good book, too.
Something that takes your mind completely away from that. Is a soft spot for something that you have right now that you think you can make? Because so many politicians have lofty ideas and they will support things, but they are not successful in moving things to accomplishment. So to go back to their district and say, well, I was for this, well, it doesn't mean a darn thing if it doesn't change the landscape. And,
Right.
and especially as a relative newcomer, sometimes in the political system that's harder to get accomplished.
I'll give you two examples. There was a bill, I'm on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and I've earned a leadership position on the Environment Subcommittee, an issue that's important to Oregon. And there was a bill that was introduced to improve weather forecasting, and it was originally going to take research funding away from climate research to put more into weather forecasting. And when I sat down with the sponsor of the bill and the then chairman of the subcommittee, I said, my colleagues on my side of the aisle won't support a bill that takes resources away from climate science and climate research. The experts who testified explained that weather is 2 weeks out, and beyond that is climate. So in order to improve weather forecasting, we'll need to continue climate research. And so how can we work together to improve the bill? And we did, and we spent quite a bit of time going back and forth with our staff, and we ended up passing the Weather Forecasting Improvement Act. I put my name on it. It's now bipartisan legislation that passed the House in April, and now we're working on how we can get that moving in the Senate. So I started out with a bill that would have passed the House but not the Senate. I would not have supported it. My colleagues, many of them would not have supported it. But now it's over in the Senate, passed the House with bipartisan support. The other example is just recently I read an article in the Washington Post about all of the reports that come into Congress every year. There are more than 4,000 of them. And oftentimes they're not read. They're prepared agencies. These are agency reports. Oftentimes it takes more than one agency to write the report. They come into Congress, and sometimes it's because the law passed years ago requiring an annual report. So when I read that and I realized that a lot of these reports aren't read, they aren't necessary any longer, what can we do about that? I thought back to my time in the Oregon legislature, repealing unnecessary or duplicative mandates, but also sunsetting certain provisions. So I just introduced a piece of legislation to have reports sunset after 5 years. So that if they're good reports, Congress will continue them, but if they're not necessary, they will end. And that will make government more efficient, reduce the time that agencies are spending preparing unnecessary reports, but still have the opportunity for the reports that are truly necessary, because there are many of those.
What about the concept of sunsetting laws that
Many of them
should be revisited and voted on again?
And many of them do sunset. Exactly, many of them do sunset. But the reports, as I said, there were more than 4,000 coming in every year to Congress, and they're not all necessary, they're not all read. So I just picked up a bipartisan co-sponsor for that legislation just the other day. So now it's bipartisan.
Since Congress has been so partisan and so many issues, how difficult is it for you, in many cases, to be bipartisan, to vote?
It's not difficult at all. It's not difficult at all.
When you see so many votes coming out there, it's just like that group, and it's like not one person has the courage to cross over.
I look at what each bill is or what each amendment is. I don't care who's sponsoring it. I'm not going to vote for something because it's sponsored by a Democrat or against something because it's sponsored by a Republican. That doesn't make any sense. I look at what it is. If it's good policy for my district, I vote for it. If it's not, I don't. So that's the way I approach it.
Excellent. Anything else you want to say?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And again, I want to encourage everyone, even those who are frustrated with government, to please stay involved and help me change it.
Terrific.